There is a very strange phenomenon around car makers who also make bikes. In every case, their cars are perceived by the car buyers very differently to the way motorbike buyers perceive their bikes. Let me give you an example. BMW cars are bought by mobile phone using gold jewellery wearing fake tan spraying Barrett House living types, whereas their bikes are mainly bought by older, wiser, wrinklier and generally more pale people. This anomaly is also present with Honda. They sell lots of fast bikes to fast people, but their cars tend to lead a much more sedate lifestyle. To prove my point, it doesn't seem to matter which button I press on the radio. All I seem to be able to get is Terry Wogan. This CR-V, CR-V, is the 2-litre VTEC, iVTEC petrol version. It's also 4-wheel drive. There is a brand spanking new 2.2 turbo diesel available, and I think that engine's going to suit the character of this car much more than this one. Which is a nice way of saying I don't like this engine. It makes a lot of noise without actually doing very much. It's not very torquey low down, and even though it revs hard, not a lot seems to happen further up. It doesn't have that VTEC power band I've seen before. It doesn't do smooth either, it's kind of rough without being gruff. I first drove this CR-V before I knew what engine it had in it, and I honestly had to ask myself if it was a diesel or a petrol. It wasn't until I realised how hard it revved that I figured out it must be the latter. It's just a bit noisy out on the road, and if you're trying to sit at 80 for example, it gets a bit wearing. The CR-V is designed to be an off-roader for people who will go anywhere but. It's 2-wheel drive for most of the time until you hit something slippy, then it shifts seamlessly into 4-wheel drive to save the day. The firmness of the ride gives the game away though. You can tell this car isn't going to have much more suspension travel than a normal car. So in reality you're limited to the odd muddy field. People buy SUVs for their high driving position as it gives them the illusion of being safer. Even though with a rating of 4 stars in crash tests, this still lags behind many of the more conventional modern cars available. That said, it is the highest rated of the sport utility bunch. In a car like this, your centre of gravity is high, so whilst the bottom of the car is trying to go around a corner, the top is trying to go straight on. The way round this is to give the car firm suspension and get rid of as much body roll as you can. The CR-V has ended up with a bit of a choppy ride, and even though it's not sporty, it's still the best compromise. The electronically assisted power steering does feel slightly artificial, and just a little bit heavy turning left and right of centre. That's probably nitpicking though. What's worse is this car's tendency to understeer, except I'm not even sure it's understeering. It's almost like I'm misjudging the amount I have to turn the steering wheel, and I keep ending up on the wrong side of the road. One of the best features of the CR-V is the space inside. Lots of headroom, lots of legroom, both front and back. That seat and the lack of a transmission tunnel pay dividends here, as the seats are higher up than your average saloon, meaning you get the feeling of more legroom, even though the front seats are no further away. Cleverly, and I wish more cars did this, the back seats recline and slide backwards and forwards, giving you a few more storage options. They also fold forward, giving you a great big boot. Honda mention antique wardrobes on their website, but seeing as it's not 6 foot long with the seats up, I'd like to see how. For me, boot space peaked with the Volvo 240. It is wide and tall though, and it's even got a wet storage area under the carpet. The only wet thing I ever carry in my boot though is my dog, and she's far too fat to fit. Probably not what they had in mind anyway. The switches and the materials used are typical Honda. They don't have that Germanically solid feel to them, but you can bet your wife on the fact they won't break. In the same way, the fabrics aren't as chic as the European manufacturers, but they are a great improvement on the 80s duvet cover material of yesteryear Hondas. This SE spec has fairly standard equipment, electric windows, mirrors. It does have an electric sunroof as well as air conditioning. Once you've punted the switch down, you'll find it only opens about halfway, which isn't really any good if you want to get a few children's heads stuck out there at the Blackpool Illuminations. The interior is filled full of little cubby holes, which are just great for children to hide opal fruits in for future generations to find. I can barely get my fingers down to the bottom of the door pockets to find out what's lurking down there. This centre console thing was also a mystery to me. It folds down, you see, to give you more space. But more space for what, I thought? It's between the seats. That was until I saw my sister instinctively put her handbag down there. Invaluable, I think she said. There's also a cool box for cooling things, which can become a hot box. For hotting things, I guess. The funky heater knobs are the funkiest things in an otherwise conservative-looking interior. apart from the clocks, which are modern, simple and clean. The LCD mile counter does look a bit cheap and untrendy, which is probably why they updated it with an LED one on the newer models. My favourite part of the interior though is this joystick style dash mounted handbrake. Once you're used to it, it's much more natural to pull towards you rather than up.
My only worry is that it looks a bit too much like the grab handle on the other side. You just got to remember not to grab it in an emergency.
I've less to say about the outside of the car. To me it looks just like the old Civic but with bigger tyres and a spare wheel on the boot. That is a bit drab and uninspiring, especially when you compare it to the new Civic. It's not going to win any styling awards.
To sum up the CR-V then, it's boring on the outside admittedly, marginally less so on the inside, but that's made up for by masses of usable space and some really groovy features. I would never intentionally go out just to drive this car, but I think most of its prospective owners will find pleasure in other ways. If you do have the choice, go for the diesel over the petrol, although neither will set your hair on fire. At least you'll know they're going to be as reliable as Switzerland, and that has to be Honda's biggest draw.